6 months of peace can make a man forget how quickly everything can turn to blood and ashes. Tobias Hartwell learned this the hard way when he saw the dust cloud rising from the eastern ridge. 5 riders moving fast, their horses lathered with sweat, and their intentions written in the violent way they spurred their mounts across his land. He was mending fence posts near the creek when the war lance caught his eye. Chief Dakota's grandfather's lance, leaning against his porch where he'd placed it that morning while cleaning the eagle feathers. The sight of it should have filled him with pride, the only white man in territorial history to carry Apache honor. Instead, it sent ice water through his veins, because those riders weren't coming for a friendly visit. Tobias dropped his hammer and reached for the rifle he'd started carrying again last week. Ever since Deputy Bradley had mentioned the rumors in town. Rumors about strangers asking questions. Strangers wanting to know about the rancher who'd helped an Indian escape justice. Strangers who didn't seem satisfied with the official story about Marshall Webb's corruption trial. The lead rider was a man he'd never seen before. Tall, lean, with the kind of pale eyes that suggested violence came naturally to him. But it was what he carried across his saddle that made Tobias's blood freeze solid. A blood-stained Apache headband. Fresh blood. Still dripping. The man reined in his horse 20 feet from the porch, close enough for Tobias to see the cruel smile spreading across his weathered face. Close enough to hear the metallic click of 5 weapons being cocked simultaneously. "You Tobias Hartwell?" the stranger asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Depends who's asking." The man's smile widened, revealing teeth stained yellow with tobacco. "Name's Clayton Morrison. Colonel Morrison was my brother." He held up the blood-stained headband like a trophy. "And this belongs to your Apache friend, the one who murdered him." Tobias felt the world tilt sideways. Ayanna had ridden out 3 days ago on a diplomatic mission to the Southern Territories. He was supposed to return tomorrow with news about extending the peace treaty. He was supposed to be safe, protected by federal marshals under government escort. But that headband told a different story, a story written in blood. "Where is he?" Tobias demanded, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Clayton's eyes glittered with satisfaction. "Somewhere you'll never find him. Unless, of course, you're willing to make a trade." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Tobias felt his heart hammering against his ribs as the implications sank in. These men hadn't come for revenge. They'd come for something worse. They'd come to finish what Marshall Webb had started. And they had Ayanna. But what Clayton Morrison said next would shatter everything Tobias thought he knew about justice, brotherhood, and the price of choosing sides in a war that was supposed to be over. "The trade is simple," Clayton continued, dismounting with the casual confidence of a man who held all the cards. "You killed my brother's reputation, destroyed his legacy, made him look like a corrupt fool in front of the whole territory." Tobias gripped his rifle tighter. Though with 5 guns trained on him, it felt about as useful as a wet match. "Your brother was corrupt. The evidence proved that. Evidence provided by a lying savage," Clayton spat. "Evidence that convenient appeared after Morrison was already dead and couldn't defend himself." His pale eyes burned with the kind of hatred that had been festering for months. "But I'm a fair man. I'll give you a chance to make it right." One of Clayton's men, a stocky killer with a scar running from his left ear to his jaw, leaned forward in his saddle. "Just say the word, Clay. We can end this right here." "Patience, Tucker," Clayton replied, never taking his eyes off Tobias. "Mr. Hartwell needs to understand his options first." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is a confession. Pre-written, just needs your signature. States that you fabricated the evidence against my brother, that you conspired with the Apache to frame an innocent officer, that everything Webb confessed to was lies forced out of him under torture." Tobias felt sick. "And if I sign this, your Indian friend lives. We ride away, and this whole ugly business gets forgotten." Clayton's smile turned predatory. "Of course, signing it also means admitting to treason, federal crime, hanging offense. But hey, at least you'll die knowing you did the right thing." The confession fluttered in the evening breeze like a death warrant. Tobias could see the trap clearly now. Sign the paper and clear Morrison's name, but destroy himself and potentially restart the war between settlers and Apache. Refuse to sign and watch Ayanna die for crimes he'd helped expose. "How do I know he's even alive?" Tobias asked. Tucker reached into his coat and produced something that made Tobias's knees go weak. A leather cord with 3 Apache prayer beads, the same cord Ayanna wore around his neck, the same beads his mother had given him before she died. "He was alive when we took this," Tucker said with obvious satisfaction. Whether he stays that way depends on how cooperative you are. Tobias thought about the last conversation he'd had with Ayanna 3 days ago. The Apache warrior had been excited about the southern negotiations, hopeful that peace could spread beyond their small corner of the territory. He'd clasped Tobias's hand and called him brother, promising to return with good news. Now he was somewhere in the hands of killers, probably bleeding, possibly dying, while Tobias stood helplessly in his own yard with a gun pointed at his chest. "You have 1 hour to decide," Clayton announced, remounting his horse. "We'll be waiting at Devil's Canyon. Come alone, bring the signed confession, and your friend lives long enough to see another sunrise. Bring anyone else, try anything clever, and we'll send you his scalp piece by piece." The 5 riders wheeled their horses and galloped away, leaving Tobias alone with the weight of an impossible choice: save Ayanna and damn himself, or protect the truth and let his brother die. But as he stood there watching the dust settle, Tobias remembered something Chief Dakota had told him 6 months ago, something about how the greatest warriors weren't those who won battles, but those who found ways to win without fighting. And suddenly, he knew exactly what he had to do, even if it meant walking straight into hell with nothing but his grandfather's old Colt and a desperate plan that would either save them both or get them killed. Tobias rode hard toward town, the war lance strapped to his saddle and his mind racing faster than his horse's hooves. Devil's Canyon was a perfect killing ground. Narrow entrance, high walls, no escape routes. Clayton Morrison wasn't planning a prisoner exchange. He was planning an execution. But Tobias had one advantage the killers didn't know about. During his 6 months as an adopted Apache, he'd learned their signal system. The same system that had summoned 50 warriors to his ranch that day Webb tried to murder Ayanna. The problem was time. 1 hour to reach town, find Deputy Bradley, convince him to help, and somehow get word to the Apache without starting a war that would destroy everything they'd built. Main Street was nearly empty when he thundered into town, dust billowing behind him like a storm cloud. The few people who saw him riding with an Apache war lance stepped quickly out of his path, their faces showing the same mixture of respect and unease they'd shown for months. Tobias had become something of a legend in the territory, the white man who'd made peace with the Apache, who'd exposed corruption in the territorial government, who carried the honor of 2 peoples. But legends, he was learning, also made excellent targets. He found Bradley at the sheriff's office, hunched over a stack of wanted posters. The young man had grown into his authority over the past 6 months, but his face still lit up with the eager loyalty of someone who'd chosen the right side of history. "Tobias!" Bradley stood, extending his hand. "Didn't expect to see you in town today. How's the ranch?" "They've got Ayanna," Tobias said without preamble. "Clayton Morrison and 4 men. They want me to sign a confession saying I fabricated the evidence against his brother." Bradley's face went pale. "Morrison has a brother." "Had," Tobias corrected. "And now he wants revenge. They're holding Ayanna at Devil's Canyon, giving me 1 hour to decide between saving my friend and destroying everything we accomplished." The deputy's hand moved instinctively toward his weapon. "We'll get Sheriff Mackenzie, round up a posse." "No time," Tobias interrupted. "And too dangerous. They see any riders coming, they'll kill Ayanna before we get within shooting distance." He paused, studying Bradley's face. "But there is another way." Bradley leaned forward. "What do you need?" Tobias pulled out a piece of paper and began writing quickly. "Take this to Miguel Santos at the trading post. Tell him it's from Brother Wolf. He'll know what that means. Ask him to get word to Chief Dakota immediately." "What does it say?" "That the white brother needs help. That enemies have taken the peace speaker. That if they want to prevent war, they need to move fast." Tobias folded the paper and pressed it into Bradley's hand. "Can you do this?" Bradley nodded grimly. "What about you?" "I'm going to Devil's Canyon, alone, like they asked." Tobias checked his Colt, making sure all 6 chambers were loaded. "But I won't be signing any confessions." "Tobias, this is suicide. 5 against 1 in a canyon with no escape routes?" "Maybe," Tobias replied, swinging back into his saddle. "But Ayanna risked his life to save the peace between our peoples. I can't do less for him." As he rode out of town, Tobias felt the weight of the war lance against his leg. Chief Dakota's grandfather had carried this weapon into countless battles, had used it to defend his people against impossible odds. Now it was Tobias's turn to discover what kind of warrior he really was. But what he found waiting at Devil's Canyon would test more than his courage. It would force him to choose between the life of his brother and the future of 2 entire peoples. Devil's Canyon earned its name honestly. The narrow passage between towering red rock walls looked like the earth had been split open by some angry god, leaving behind a scar that never healed. Tobias approached slowly, every instinct screaming danger, the war lance heavy in his grip. The silence was wrong. No birds, no insects, no wind, just the hollow echo of his horse's hooves on stone. Even the animals knew this place reeked of death. Clayton Morrison's voice echoed off the canyon walls before Tobias saw him. "Right on time, Hartwell. I was beginning to think you didn't care about your Apache friend." They had positioned themselves perfectly. Clayton stood on a ledge 20 feet up the canyon wall, rifle trained downward. Tucker and 2 other men crouched behind boulders at the canyon's mouth, blocking any retreat. The 5th man was nowhere to be seen, which meant he was either watching from above or guarding Ayanna. "Where is he?" Tobias called out, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his chest. "Safe," Clayton replied. "For now. You bring the confession?" Tobias reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. Not the confession Clayton wanted, but a letter he'd written quickly before leaving town. A letter that would tell the world exactly what happened here, no matter how this ended. "Show me Ayanna first." Clayton gestured to someone Tobias couldn't see. A moment later, the 5th man appeared on the opposite ledge, dragging a bound figure into view. Even at this distance, Tobias could see the blood matting Ayanna's dark hair, the way he slumped against his captor like a man barely conscious. But he was alive. That was something. "Satisfied?" Clayton asked. "Now toss up that confession and we can end this civilized like." "Or," came a new voice from the canyon entrance, "you can all drop your weapons and surrender peacefully." Everyone spun toward the sound. Deputy Bradley stood silhouetted against the evening sky, his badge glinting in the dying light, his rifle trained on Tucker's back. Clayton's face twisted with rage. "I told you to come alone." "He did," Bradley called back. "I followed him on my own authority. Got tired of criminals thinking they can operate freely in my territory." Tobias felt his heart sink. Bradley meant well, but his presence had just turned a dangerous situation into a death trap. Now Clayton had no reason to keep Ayanna alive, and the canyon would become a killing ground for all of them. "You stupid boy," Clayton snarled, swinging his rifle toward Bradley. "You just killed them both." That's when the arrow sprouted from the stock of Clayton's rifle, splintering the wood and sending the weapon spinning from his hands. Then another arrow appeared in the shoulder of the man holding Ayanna, causing him to release his prisoner and stumble backward. Apache warriors materialized on the canyon rim like spirits rising from the stone itself. Not 50 this time, only 6, but positioned perfectly, with clear shots at every one of Clayton's men. Chief Dakota's voice rang out in English, carrying the authority of countless generations. "Clayton Morrison, you have violated the peace treaty by attacking an Apache diplomat under federal protection. Surrender now and face white man's justice. Resist and face ours." Clayton looked around wildly, finally understanding that he'd been outmaneuvered. The hunter had become the hunted, the trap had become a cage, and his carefully planned revenge was collapsing around him like a house of cards. But desperate men don't surrender easily. Tucker raised his pistol toward Bradley, his scarred face twisted with killing rage. 2 other gunmen swung their weapons toward the Apache positions. The man guarding Ayanna drew a knife and pressed it to the wounded warrior's throat. And in that moment, Tobias realized that all their careful planning, all their tactical advantages, all their righteous intentions meant nothing if everyone started shooting at once. If you were Tobias, what would you do? Risk everything on a desperate charge to save Ayanna? Or trust the Apache warriors to handle this without getting his friend killed? Tell me in the comments. I need to know which side you'd choose. Because what Tobias decided next would determine whether justice prevailed or whether Devil's Canyon became a graveyard for heroes. Tobias made his choice in the space between heartbeats. Not a charge, not retreat, but something the warriors of 2 cultures had taught him. Sometimes the greatest weapon was words spoken at exactly the right moment. "Tucker!" he shouted, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd faced death before and lived to tell about it. "Look around you. Really look. 6 Apache warriors with clear shots, a federal deputy with legal authority, and 1 rancher who's got nothing left to lose." Tucker's pistol wavered, his scarred face showing the first flicker of doubt. "You kill that deputy. You're not just fighting me," Tobias continued, never taking his eyes off the man with the knife at Ayanna's throat. "You're fighting the United States government. You kill that Apache diplomat, you're not just breaking the law, You're starting a war that'll burn this territory from here to Santa Fe. Clayton spat blood from where he'd bitten his tongue when the arrow destroyed his rifle. Pretty words, Hartwell. But we're past talking now. Are we? Tobias asked, slowly reaching for the war lance strapped to his saddle. Because I'm thinking you haven't heard the rest of my terms. The movement caused every weapon in the canyon to shift toward him. But Tobias continued with deliberate calm. See, I wrote a letter before coming here. Deputy Bradley's got a copy. So does Miguel Santos at the trading post. So does Chief Dakota. He lifted the lance, its eagle feathers catching the last rays of sunlight. Letter details everything. Who you are, what you wanted, how you kidnapped a federal diplomat to force a false confession. Clayton's face went pale. You're bluffing. Letter's already on its way to the territorial governor, and the federal marshal's office, and the newspaper in Santa Fe. Tobias smiled grimly. Even if you kill all of us right here, right now, by tomorrow morning the whole territory will know exactly what Clayton Morrison and his boys tried to do. The man holding the knife to Ayanna's throat looked nervously at his boss. Clay, maybe we should... Shut up, Clayton snarled. But Tobias could see the panic creeping into his pale eyes. The careful plan was unraveling. The perfect revenge turning into a public disaster. Here's what's going to happen, Tobias continued, raising the war lance higher. You're going to release Ayanna. You're going to ride away from this canyon and keep riding until you're out of the territory. And you're going to pray that Chief Dakota's mercy extends further than mine does. And if we don't, Chief Dakota's voice answered from the canyon rim, speaking in Apache. The words rolled like thunder off the stone walls, ancient and implacable. When he finished, he translated for the white men below. He says the choice is yours, justice under white man's law or justice under Apache law, but there will be justice. That's when the sound of approaching hoofbeats echoed through the canyon. Not Apache ponies this time. Iron shoes on stone moving fast. Federal cavalry by the sound of it. Bradley smiled grimly. I sent word to Fort Richardson before following you. Figured they'd want to know about threats against a federal diplomat. Clayton Morrison's carefully planned revenge had become a complete catastrophe. Surrounded by enemies, his crimes documented, federal troops approaching, and his brother's reputation about to be destroyed all over again in the territorial newspapers. But cornered animals were still the most dangerous, and what Clayton did next would prove that sometimes when men have nothing left to lose, they choose to drag everyone down with them. Clayton Morrison's laugh was the sound of a man's sanity finally snapping. It echoed off the canyon walls like the cry of a wounded animal, desperate and dangerous and completely beyond reason. You think this is over? He screamed, spittle flying from his lips. You think you've won? My brother was worth 10 of your savage friends. And I'll be damned if I let him go to his grave branded a traitor. He drew a hidden pistol from his boot with lightning speed, not aiming at Tobias or Bradley or even the Apache warriors above. Instead, he pointed it directly at the man holding Ayanna, his own ally, the one person keeping the diplomat alive. Bobby, he shouted to the knife-wielding killer, you cut that Indian's throat right now, or I put a bullet in your spine. The threat was insane, suicidal. The act of a man who'd lost all touch with reality, but that made it more dangerous, not less. Bobby's eyes went wide with terror as he realized his boss had gone completely mad. Clay, what are you— Do it! Clayton shrieked, cocking the pistol. Kill him! Kill him and let them try to prove my brother was corrupt without their star witness. Tobias felt time slowing down, the way it always did in moments when life and death balanced on a knife's edge. He could see Bobby's hand trembling on the blade. Could see the madness burning in Clayton's eyes, could hear the approaching cavalry getting closer but not close enough. This was the moment, the choice that would define everything that came after. Tobias hefted the war lance, feeling its perfect balance, remembering every lesson Chief Dakota had taught him about honor and sacrifice, and the price of protecting what mattered most. The weapon had been carried into battle by generations of Apache warriors, had tasted the blood of enemies and protectors alike. Now, it would taste blood again. He threw the lance with every ounce of strength in his body, putting behind it not just his arm but his heart, his soul, his absolute determination that Ayanna would not die in this god-forsaken canyon. The weapon flew through the air like a bolt of lightning, its eagle feathers streaming behind it, its iron point gleaming with deadly purpose. It struck Bobby center mass just as his knife began to move toward Ayanna's throat. The impact drove him backward off the ledge, the blade spinning harmlessly away, his scream cut short by the crack of bone on stone 20 feet below. But Clayton's pistol was already swinging toward Tobias, murder blazing in his pale eyes. "You killed my last chance, you Apache-loving bastard. Now I'll kill you." The shot rang out like thunder in the confined space of the canyon. But it wasn't Clayton's gun that fired. Deputy Bradley had put a bullet through Clayton Morrison's heart before the madman could complete his turn. The corrupt revenge-seeker dropped like a stone, his unfired pistol clattering across the canyon floor. Silence fell over Devil's Canyon like a burial shroud. The remaining two gunmen threw down their weapons and raised their hands, clearly wanting no part of their dead leader's insanity. Chief Takota's warriors descended swiftly to secure Ayana, while the sound of cavalry horses grew ever closer. Tobias walked slowly to where his war lance had fallen, pulling it free from Bobby's lifeless body. The ancient weapon was unmarked, ready to serve again if needed. But he hoped, God how he hoped, that its fighting days were finally over. Ayana, supported by two Apache warriors, managed a weak smile. "Brother Wolf comes when called," he said in Apache, using the name the tribe had given Tobias. "Like always, family protects family," Tobias replied in the same language, words Chief Takota had taught him 6 months ago. As federal cavalry poured into the canyon to clean up the aftermath, Tobias realized something profound had happened here. Not just the defeat of criminals or the rescue of a friend, but proof that the peace they'd fought so hard to build was stronger than the hatred that sought to destroy it. But this victory had come at a cost that would echo through the territory for years to come, and what happened next would show whether justice truly had triumphed, or whether they'd merely won one battle in a war that would never truly end. The federal investigation that followed Devil's Canyon lasted 3 weeks, and turned up evidence that shocked even the most cynical officials in the territorial government. Clayton Morrison hadn't been acting alone. He'd been funded by a network of war profiteers who'd made fortunes selling weapons to both sides of the Apache conflicts. Captain William Hayes, the federal marshal who led the investigation, found Tobias at his ranch on a crisp morning in late October. The officer's face carried the weary expression of a man who'd seen too much corruption in too many places. "We found Morrison's financial records," Hayes said, accepting a cup of coffee on Tobias's porch. "Payments from arms dealers in Chicago, gun manufacturers in Connecticut, even ammunition suppliers from as far away as Baltimore. Your friend's kidnapping was just the beginning." Tobias set down his own cup, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. "Beginning of what?" "They were planning to restart the Apache Wars," Hayes replied grimly. "Not just here, but throughout the Southwest. Morrison's job was to eliminate Ayana and frame the Apache for attacking federal diplomats. Would have given the army justification to break every treaty and drive the tribes onto reservations. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Dozens of men in positions of power, all working together to profit from human suffering on an unimaginable scale. If Clayton Morrison had succeeded at Devil's Canyon, thousands would have died in the wars that followed. "What happens now?" Tobias asked. "Now we finish what you started 6 months ago," Hayes said. "Every name, every payment, every corrupt official gets exposed. The territorial governor's already called for a complete investigation of the Marshal's service. Deputy Bradley's been promoted to interim sheriff with full federal backing. But the most important news came at the end of their conversation. "There's something else," Hayes said, reaching into his coat. "President Taylor himself signed this." The document was written on official White House stationery, heavy paper that carried the weight of federal authority. As Tobias read, his hands began to shake. It was a presidential commendation, recognizing his extraordinary service in preserving peace between the United States government and the Apache Nation. More than that, it formally acknowledged his adoption into the Apache tribe and granted him status as an official mediator between the two peoples. "You're being offered a position," Hayes explained. "Federal Indian agent for the entire Southwest Territory. Answer directly to Washington. Work with tribal leaders to expand the peace treaties. Make sure nothing like this conspiracy can happen again." Tobias stared at the document, hardly believing what he was reading. 6 months ago, he'd been a simple rancher who'd given water to a thirsty stranger. Now, the President of the United States wanted him to help shape the future of an entire region. "There's just one condition," Hayes added with a slight smile. "Chief Takota has to approve the appointment. Government wants to make sure you have the tribe's full support." As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of approaching horses echoed across the ranch. But these weren't the desperate hoofbeats of men riding in anger or fear. These were the measured steps of a ceremonial procession. Chief Dakota rode at the head of a group of 20 Apache elders, all dressed in their finest regalia. Behind them came Ayanna, fully healed from his ordeal, carrying something that made Tobias's breath catch in his throat. A second war lance, identical to the one he already carried, but newer, unmarked by battle. The chief dismounted slowly, his ancient eyes bright with something that looked like pride. "Brother Wolf," he said in perfect English, "we have come to discuss your future." The ceremony that followed was unlike anything Captain Hayes had ever witnessed. The Apache elders formed a circle around Tobias, each one speaking in turn about what they had observed, what they had learned, what they believed about this white man who had chosen honor over safety time and again. Chief Dakota spoke last, his words carrying the weight of decades of leadership and wisdom. 6 months ago, we gave you the lance of a warrior. Today, we offer you the lance of a peace chief. Accept it, and you become more than brother to our people. You become guardian of the treaty that protects all our children. The second war lance was a masterpiece of Apache craftsmanship. The shaft was carved with symbols representing both cultures, eagle feathers intertwined with olive branches, Apache prayers written alongside words in English. At its point was inscribed a single word in both languages, peace. But understand, Chief Dakota continued, this honor comes with responsibility. If you accept the white man's position, you must also accept our traditions. You will speak for both peoples. You will carry the burden of both peoples. And when the time comes, you will sacrifice for both peoples. Tobias looked around the circle of weathered faces, seeing decades of suffering and survival. Wisdom earned through loss and hope maintained against impossible odds. These people had trusted him with their most sacred honor, had risked everything to help him save Ayanna, had chosen peace over vengeance even when vengeance would have been easier. "I accept," he said simply. What followed was a celebration that lasted until the stars came out. Apache and white men sharing food, stories, and hope for a future where their children might grow up without fear. Deputy Bradley arrived with news that the last of the arms dealers had been arrested in Chicago. Sheriff McKenzie brought word that the territorial legislature was drafting new laws to prevent corruption in the marshal's service. But the most meaningful moment came when Ayanna presented Tobias with a gift from the Apache children. A drawing showing 2 figures standing together under a bright sun. One carrying a war lance, the other an olive branch, both protecting a group of small figures that represented all the children of the territory. They drew this, Ayanna explained, to show what they want their world to look like. A place where the warriors fight for peace, not war. As the evening wound down, and the Apache prepared to return to their village, Chief Dakota pulled Tobias aside for a private word. "The white government will test you," he warned. "They will pressure you to choose their interests over ours. And our people will test you too. They will watch to see if power changes who you are. And if I fail?" The old chief smiled. "You gave water to a dying enemy when it would have been safer to let him die. You risked everything to save one man when you could have saved yourself. You threw your grandfather's lance to protect a brother when bullets would have been easier." He clasped Tobias's shoulder. "Men who make such choices do not fail. They simply find new ways to succeed." If you're enjoying the story, subscribe to the channel. 2 years later, the Southwest Territory had become a model for peaceful coexistence between settlers and native tribes. The peace treaties had been expanded to include 17 different Apache bands, 3 Navajo clans, and 4 Pueblo communities. Trade routes were secure, children attended integrated schools, and the territorial government had implemented the strongest anti-corruption laws in the United States. Tobias Hartwell, federal Indian agent and Apache peace chief, split his time between Washington meetings and tribal councils, always carrying 2 war lances, one for war when necessary, one for peace whenever possible. He married a schoolteacher named Sarah who shared his vision of a better world, and together they raised 3 children who spoke both English and Apache fluently. Deputy Bradley became Sheriff Bradley, then Judge Bradley, and eventually Territorial Congressman Bradley, carrying forward the lessons he'd learned about courage and justice. The Apache continued to thrive on their expanded reservation lands, while also participating in the growing territorial economy. And every year on the anniversary of that first day, when a thirsty stranger had stumbled into his life, Tobias would return to the old well on his ranch and remember how everything had changed with a single cup of water. Because in the end, that's how the world really changes. Not through grand gestures or mighty battles, but through small acts of decency that ripple outward like stones thrown into still water, creating waves that eventually reach shores you never imagined touching. Now click on the video on the screen to hear a story even better than this one, where honor meets betrayal in the unforgiving landscape of the Old West. And one man's choice between loyalty and justice will determine the fate of an entire town. Click on the video now.